here's my new anti-racism video in which I, a 38-year-old man, go on a full-scale, full-bore attack on a 5-year-old moron. No, I had requests to see from people, or people trying to find out if I was gonna, unleash on young Will Connolly over the past few days. The whole thing makes me feel a bit gross. I feel like an angry old man, shouting at a little boy, frankly. So I didn't want to. For those of you unaware, I put out a few tweets which I think then got onto the other audience and therefore made a bit of a fuss out of the fact that young Will Connolly, egg boy, has, pretty much become like a bit red-pilled, anti-vax, anti-lockdown, and that's actually been happening for some time now. And for those of you living under two rocks, Egg Boy Will Connolly is well known for, a few years ago, the day after the Christchurch Massacre, after former Senator Fraser Anning was making various opportunistic far-right comments, capitalising and victim-blaming, actually, on the massacre, blaming it on the Muslim community and on immigration. He came to an event that we had organised an effort at, and he snuck in to where Fraser Anning was doing a speech in an industrial lot in Moorabbin, and he egged him. Okay, so he was hailed as a bloody legend, a fucking legend, by a lot of centre lefties and what have you, and indeed by us as well, because it was a very well timed, very useful stunt that fucked over Fraser Anning. We all loved it. But then he, spent a few years huffing his own farts, being a little kid, as kids want to do, but in a very online public capacity, with now hundreds of thousands of subs on Instagram. And, it turns out that what he's been doing for quite some time now is becoming immersed in sort of anti-vax, anti-lockdown kind of, and increasingly alt-right kind of ideas. But, has never, by the repeat laurel wreath handing over to him from centre-left types and what have you, has never really had to question himself, better himself as a young man in a political sense. And so that was going on right under people's noses. And, given the amount of time that I know several comrades have tried from the sidelines to put into trying to steer this person with a huge audience around and away from some of these dumb ideas, and given that it was all clearly for nothing, given that his posts were becoming more and more clearly anti-lockdown, and that indeed I knew him to have been attending anti-lockdown events for a while, I thought, well, he's done his dash. He needs to cop a public pull your head in. But of course, people like that, when they're just untested and they're a bit of a young moron, they don't take it as that. They take it as a cancel culture. Why? Because they're listening to Joe Rogan talk about these things, talk about the modern world in terms of contrived frameworks and concepts such as cancel culture. That's what most people, young men, are getting instead of an education. They're getting a garbage education from idiots. And he's just one example of that. And the only thing that made it worth commenting is, of course, apart from his large audience, the fact that he's still hailed as some sort of bunk anti-fascist hero by, I don't know, like Shovel headlines or Batuta headlines about how he's a little hero. And that's all fine. I mean, everyone needs a little hero, I suppose. Or it was fine for a little while because we were all very happy about his contributions to the undermining of Fraser Anning. But I didn't want to do a video about any of that. I felt like I was being a cringe old man about a little boy, just one of many who've been educated by idiots. However, some things came to mind, because I'm a white bloke what's done anti-fascism for a few years as well. And I have an audience of many other white blokes. Not purely, of course. I'm happy to say it's a very mixed, diverse audience, thankfully, you know. But I know there's more than a few white blokes who listen to me. And I think that young man's arc offers us a few helpful opportunities for introspection as to how to be a white bloke doing anti-fascism. White blokes in anti-fascism, white blokes generally, white people generally, we are prone to protagonist syndrome. Some of you might call it white saviorism, but it generally might be, I think of it as protagonist syndrome. We do think we're going to be the hero, what's going to solve the thing forever. You know what I mean? The issue that we're taking on. This is not unique to the field of anti-fascism, and it's not unique to white men, or indeed to anyone. Everyone can be bitten by that kind of like self-consumed, self-absorption kind of thing. But I think in a political sense, it does seem to be something what my white brothers and sisters are particularly plagued by. Another helpful example is the refugee rights scene. That's not coded as being as conflict-driven and hetero-masculine as some of anti-fascism has been. However erroneously, you know what I mean? The contributions of trans people, feminists and Fantifa and what have you to anti-fascism should not be undermined or eroded over time, but, you know, they should always be taken into consideration. But, you know, there's an aggro 101 type of anti-fascism which is about conflict, and, you know, that's all I'm saying is that's very different to, say, refugee rights activism, which is often people wringing their hands and going, I feel your pain, refugees. Not all people, but a particular kind of white woman. And I say that because I'm just thinking of another kind of particularly obnoxious strain of white saviorism that I recall over the years, and protagonist syndrome. And it's helpful to this discussion because it's very different, but it's a similar sort of thing. And it's kind of neo-spiritual hippie woke types acting as though their heroic act will achieve the goals of the protest movement they've taken part of. It's a good visual representation of that. See, we came across this painting several years ago, and I'm going to display it. And this was painted by a white refugee advocate, and she literally painted herself as a massive white naked woman carrying her literal, in the context of the painting, bleeding heart over a sea of literally faceless brown people, and she's bleeding her bleeding heart blood all over the faceless brown people. And to me, that was such a hilarious / cringe direct representation of this kind of protagonist syndrome / saviorism complex that I took the piss out of it. You see, at the time I was running a little project, not very well known or anything. We didn't go too far with it. Might come back one day, called MASK, Minority Allyship and Action Saviour Collective. And I was playing a race-shifting, neo-spiritual, grifting hippie wook called Zachary at that stage. And my precise project was to take the piss out of people like this. So in jest, we sort of shared it on the Mask Facebook page, which is very small, and sort of going, oh, this is amazing, you know, I feel like Jesus over refugees as well. The painter got in touch with me, and she got very upset. You know, people have written at length, Ruby Hamad and many others, about white women's tears as a defence against criticism of, you know, white saviorism in the past. She got very upset that she was being criticised for her work, and she made some dramatic gestures about burning the painting and what have you. And I said, well, you don't have to burn it or anything that dramatic, but you might want to reconsider the painting. And then she goes, right, I'm going to go back to the drawing board and I'm going to make some big changes. And she came back, and because she had reached out, I said, okay, I'm going to not be sharky. I'm going to be the real me. I'm not going to do this character thing I was doing of this, race-shifting hippie wook type. And I'm going to tell you what I think the problems are with this. And I said, you're massive. You're the centerpiece. That's a visual representation of white people centering themselves in a struggle that involves non-white people. The brown people at the bottom are faceless, which is kind of a visual representation of the way that you might regard them subconsciously as secondary citizens. The bleeding heart thing is you placing your white emotions as central in this struggle for refugee rights. She goes, okay, I'm going to go back and repaint the painting. She comes back, and the one amendment she's made to the painting is she's put some jeans on the white woman. And she's gone, it's amazing now. I've fixed it. And I said, what? You've just put some clothes on. And she said, yes, well, I thought it was a bit inappropriate that she was naked. I said, but that isn't what I suggested as being the substantial problems with the painting. And then she goes, well, I'm not sorry that I'm white. And I'm like, you just said to me that it's okay to be white thing at the alt-right. And to me, and this is a story that is always in my head. It's like my Anzac Day, lest we forget. I never forget it because it's so important to me about how white saviorism and white protagonist syndrome can be so close. You want horseshoe fucking theory? I'll give you some place where I think it applies. It's that how close that actually then becomes to like far right, alt right stuff. Let's go back in time to the day when that occurred. Actually, the day of the Christchurch Massacre, and maybe the events that occurred around there, because I'd like to talk about them, and I'd like to talk, I suppose, about the reception that we've got and how that might have fed what he's turned into now, and then a little bit about my own journey as to why I don't think, and why I have been, thank fuck, given the space, the time to marinate in collectivism to the degree where I'm not, I do have sound politics now, and I get to at least offset some of my natural white man's tendency towards protagonist syndrome through collective work behind the scenes and such. Let's go there bit by bit. So the Christchurch Massacre occurred, and what a tragedy. I mean, we won't go into that again right here, right now in great detail. But for those of us who had already worked in that space and were warning people of the potential capacity for tragedy and for violence of the people that we were combating, of course, it was devastating for everyone. Devastating for nobody more than the victims and the people around them, and for the broader Muslim community, not just in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but around the world. And forever may we stand in solidarity with those poor, those martyrs. But it wasn't too long after sitting down and trying to process the magnitude of what had occurred that I saw former Senator Fraser Anning's tweet in which he victim blamed in a deliberate, calculated act of, like provocative opportunism. So when I saw that, a lot of my struggle to process and my grief turned straight to anger. And I caught up with Sean Bedlam of Yard, Yelling at Racist Dogs, our yelling crack team at the time, crack abuse team at the time. And we got together and we were very angry. And even though we had known that Fraser Anning was going to be doing an event in Moorabbin Industrial Lot the day after, up until that point, we were not going to go and direct people there because we thought it was too dangerous, because it's in the middle of fucking nowhere, and, We weren't necessarily going to send people into that environment because we didn't think it would be safe. But after the massacre and then those tweets, all of that turned into rage. And we thought, fuck you, we're going to go. And we're going to tell other people where it is. Because it wasn't getting around at that stage. We're going to tell people, but we're not making an event. We don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? We're just overthinking about safety. We're just going to fucking go. And if anyone else wants to go, and we imagine that people would want to, we're going to tell them that we're going, and you can do what you like. So that's what we did on the yard page. And as I recall, young Will and his mates were like, I should egg him in the comments of that post. That's what I recall from the time. Everyone was fucking mad at this person. Everyone was fucking mad. This is not a partisan political issue at this stage. This is a mass global outpouring of grief. And then what the fuck? You know, around the world it was like, what did this Australian senator say? I remember the time. You know, people might lose that sense of the time. And that's another reason why I think this is worth telling. Now, I can't tell you everything that happened on that day, and indeed, I'm surprised I'm going to tell you as much as I am. But so I had organised people, and someone who I don't work with anymore had inserted themselves, as they repeatedly wanted to do at the time, into the organising. Some other organiser, activist type down in Melbourne. Now, this person did a couple of things that I think made the day very difficult. They woke up in the morning after having inserted themselves into the organising to try and convince me to not even go at all, saying that there was some solidarity demo in the city. I sort of had to explain to this person that actually anti-fascism is often about conflict and confrontation with, you know, fascists. And I thought, after the call, why am I having to explain that? Then this person positioned themselves so as to do recon at the time. Okay? So they would then sort of drive around, do blockies and tell us where we could go to get to the centre. We were told to all meet on this spot that turned out to be on the other end of the block. And then I think it turned out that we were told that because this person didn't want to be positioned too close to the front of the centre. This is what I recall. I could be forgetting some of the details. What I'm telling you is that because of that, and then coppers came not too long after, by the time we'd realised that really we were at the back of this car park lot at the other side of the centre and not at the front, we were like kettled by police who then are all rocked up. They carried us and told us you could stay there and did a big line. And then we were like just on the other side of the block, and I didn't really have any spatial awareness of the area that we were in because, again, it was this confusing little industrial lot. So Fraser Anning's meet's happening over the other side of the place, and we're all far too far away. In the context of that, young Will came up to me, a little 5-year-old child on his bike, and he goes, I've got eggs in my pocket. I want to egg the senator. And I said, don't do that, kid, because there's Nazi security in there for him and yada, yada, yada. Because we were just doing our yelling thing, and we were catching guests on the way, just abusing the shit out of them, at least getting some of their rocks off, you know what I mean? About 100 people came. That was quite impressive, I think. So then Will didn't listen to me. He went in anyway. And got in. You know why I think he got in? He got in because not long before that, they'd had a St Kilda rally in the city, and the fascists had, organised by Blair Cottrell and Fraser Anning, attended, and they had several hundred people go there. It was St Kilda Beach. It was supposed to be to stop African gang violence. You know, that was their opportunistic race-based issue that they'd leapt onto at the time. There were a series of kids at there, like young lad-looking little kids, and Will actually looked very similar to them, to the degree when he first came up to me with his bike, before he said something, I thought, oh, this is one of these kids. What the fuck is he coming up to me for? And I think that's why the security, Neil Erickson and that, let him in, because they thought, oh, he's one of them, you know. Whereas he was like, anyone who remotely left, even sort of journalists and what have you, he was telling them, no, you can't come in, because they were being very protective of Fraser. They didn't want anything. And they knew that people were pissed off at him, you know. So So that's why he got in. And he got to do his stunt. Now, we were over the other side of the rally. There were a couple of stragglers who hadn't found where we were and had gone to the front. And they were being, attacked by a couple of people. I found out about that way too late. We're stuck over the other fucking side. And all in all, I felt that there were a number of fuck-ups and I sorely fucking regretted it, And it was a wasted opportunity. Because it's hard to be and I tell you, it's hard to be a hero in retrospect or a tough cunt in retrospect. But I must say, in retrospect, if I could do that day all over again, there are all these politicians and media types going, oh, the egg was violent. But my greatest regret, and I say this as someone who's tried for years to organise non-violent protest efforts, I have, not just for myself, but collectively, and stuff that works and works popularly, but doesn't result in everyone getting charged and what have you. Do you know what I mean? Diversity of tactics. And I always stand in solidarity with people who are good with their fucking hands, but that's what I've always tried to do. But even though that's me, even despite all of that, my one greatest regret from that day, and I look at this and I just think, in the broader sense, they deserved to be knocked out, and we had a lot of people and we could have really hurt them. And my big regret, honestly, is that we weren't able to be out the front so that we could have rushed it and attacked some of them. Because I would have loved to have collected some of those fucking animals. Because that was the day after this massacre, and they were there in deliberate support of it, And I will never forgive any of the fucking animals who were there on that day. And I wish I could have been with a large group of people attacking them. No non-violent shit. I genuinely regret that. And I regret that if anyone else had that kind of physical, political will at the time, that if they attended with our contingent and didn't get to do that, I think in the great expanse of things, it might not have looked so great at the time, and I'm very grateful, which we'll get on to the impact of Egbo's stunt. But I think in the greater broad sense, which a few years on you can look back on it and say it was genuinely a missed opportunity to deliver some physical justice to these fucking animals, because they deserved it, and they will go on to deserve it. And that is true and correct. And anyone who is right-minded should agree with me there, that the day after our worst ever mass murderer unleashes terrible violence upon these people, anyone who goes along to support that deserved to be assaulted at the very least. But that didn't happen due to a number of mistakes. But a 17-year-old boy managed to get in there and use the barest level of violence. It's silly to even. It's like a childhood stunt to enact justice upon this adult man who then attacked the child. And I was driving some of my comrades on the way back into the city when someone goes in the back seat, they go, hang on, I think someone's egged him. What? And I remembered that little child I'd spoken to, and I'm like, holy shit. We looked at the footage. It looked like an actual electricity shot. There was one still frame with this like egg coming out. And I was just so relieved, actually, because I had my regrets, of course, but something papered that over, and boy, did it turn out to be effective. And it led on to what the effect that had, that thing that Will Connolly did, led to a chain reaction in other cities, because he was trying to do a tour for his, candidacy, his for his political party he was launching at the time. He was doing a tour, And he ended up having to cancel many of those other dates. I think it was in Sydney and in Newcastle. People were fucking gunning for him. And I think they would have been anyway to a degree, but I think the egg thing meant they had a taste of blood. See, there's another thing that happened on that very same day. Is someone was abusing him at the airport. It suddenly became Get Fraser Anning. And it was fantastic. And in no small part was that due to the brilliant, as non-violent as could be, stunt of Will Connolly. And I was so grateful to that little boy because I do believe it was instrumental in his votes being low enough for him to not get back in. And then he was abandoned. And then Fraser Anning ended up skipping the country, becoming, I don't know, an illegal immigrant or something over in the US. Basically, he fled the banks. He's knee-deep in debt. That's probably half the reason he sold his soul to the neo-Nazi devil and got this team on board of these scumbags who said, we'll help you get back in and have a full run as a senator and then you can pay back the banks. But he didn't get that and he buggered off in the end. Good riddance. Now, I'll always be grateful to that little boy for what he did on that day. And I'll also always be grateful that he did the very shrewd gesture of donating the 100,000 plus that he received at the time over to I think it was victims and what have you. Again, brilliant. Oh, thank fuck. We were all so grateful at that time. But then we get on to something that I'm not sure is even his fault so much as the fault of everyone else around him. Centre-left, largely roundly apolitical Australians, white ones in particular, I think, we have a thing where we really want racism to be ended forever with Aussie legend larrikin stunts, like Corey Worthington shit, We love the idea that some little fucking legend is going to come along and stop the racisms once and for all. And I think what's really happening there is that we're going, sick. That's an opportunity to not have to talk about racism forever. Do you know what I mean? The problem with that in this particular case is that Australia just birthed our worst ever mass murderer over in New Zealand, mind you, but he's ours. Sorry. And we're not talking about that because we're too busy talking about you little fucking legend, you ripper, you bloody beauty, fucking egg boy, Aussie bloody legend. And that's a way that centre-lefty people, I think it's a device, whether they know it or not. No shade, just saying it's a way that we, whatever, can escape a substantial drag of a conversation about our very deep racist tendencies. It's a little bit, it's actually quite a lot of a bit, like when, say, centre-right people or what have you will go, oh God, this is such a drag, why are you talking about racism? It doesn't exist anymore, that kind of thing. See, centre-lefty people, they won't say that, but they'll seize on the stunts, the little Aussie larrikin legend things, because that also means that they don't have to talk about racism anymore. Because there was a hell of a lot more written about how much of a legend that young Egg Boy was than there was ever written about how much of an Australian Brenton Tarrant was. And if you see that that sort of tendency towards wanting to obfuscate the deep, difficult conversations about racism by focusing on hero figures, white hero figures instead, look at that fucking movie. The one that they're planning to put out, where Rose Byrne is put in as Jacinda Ardern. that's centering how great of a leader she was after the tragedy. The fucking blood has barely dried up off of the ground of that mosque, and these cunts would rather talk about hero figures who handled it well afterwards and hugged a few crying people. Such is our desire, our white desire, to get out of deep conversations. And that's what we all did with young Egg Boy, young Will Connolly, because that kid just spent years getting wreaths and laurels handed to him and gold medals. It fulfilled the innate white man's tendency towards protagonist syndrome, because he is all 17 years old thinking, wow, I just fixed racism, whilst never having to read anything to do with substantial anti-fascist politics. And indeed, this kid never went on to acknowledge or contribute to anything related to anti-fascism or anti-racism ever again. Which is a shame, I guess, you know. But I will say this. When I look back on it, I think me, back in those days, 2017, 2018, I wasn't far enough along in my journey of anti-fascist stuff, activism, work, either. And I think if I had had an Aussie larrikin legend stunt get big back then, or say with Million Flag Patriots or any one of my earlier stuff, I think I would have become fucking insufferable myself. So thank fuck the person that's me now can say that. I can say thank fuck. Thank fuck I was allowed to marinate in activism and collectivism for longer. Because here's what happened. The most brilliant chapter of Yard, or whatever you want to call it, came after all of that. When we started participating with organisers to do some, I keep calling it lately, I call it post-Yard activities. And we did it at Slut Walk, for example, when we knew that a far-right Nazi provocateur of the time was coming along to, abuse and traumatise, the attendees of that rally. And we came along and we ruined their footage. We have a series of tactics we got to develop. Post-Yard dark arts. And we started, and these things didn't involve any footage at all. There was no me putting up cool footage and going, look what a hero I am. There was merely working with other factions of activists to get shit done, using the best of the strategies that we'd cooked up during the obnoxious MFP and Yard days that I've been able to marinate on, but putting them into practice in less showy and more collectivist ways. And we got some real shit done during those times. And that's some of my proudest stuff. And I don't have any videos to show you, because it came to the point where it'd be like a vegan comrade would call me up and they'd go, and I'm not part of the vegan animal rights movement, they'd call me up and they'd go, Avi Yemeni's here, what should we do? And I'd go A, B, C, D, E. And they'd do it and he'd fuck off. Extinction Rebellion. It's not my movement. Someone from there would contact. What should we do? A, B, C, D, E. And then when I wouldn't get the calls, because other people would learn the tactics, we'd just stay and chat over things. And I started to build up this this network of other people and other movements who were learning themselves how to do the tricks. And the tricks didn't lead to cool videos, but they fucked up the other alt-right pests videos. I'm actually doing a video on those strategies as well. That's coming. Wait for that. You know, I want to put those tactics out there for other people of the future to work with, you know. It'd be useless if all this stuff died in my fucking head or in our heads. I got the opportunity to turn into that person and to realise that, well, I might be the guy who puts my head in the fucking videos and does all the things. Oh, Tom Tannegy, here's my social media pages with my fucking head on them. Here's my Patreon and what. I might do that. And that might lead to an indulgence of one's innate or instinctive white man protagonist syndrome. However, what I have come to be able to develop, and I'm so grateful to have had the time for this, is an offsetting or allaying collectivist instinct, where a lot of my best anti-fascism stuff is stuff that I cannot and I will not ever talk about publicly, because all it is just me working with other people in groups and passing information around to different people, whether it be journos or this one or fucking whoever, you know, and expanding on that network, being more and more trustworthy over the years, you know, fostering that reputation of someone that can be trusted to keep stum with information and to get the damn thing done without any heroics, without any credit claiming or getting a fucking wreath laid around my, you know, a wreath garland laid around my neck afterwards. No credit, just work. And I regard that stuff that I do now as being it's like carbon credits for one's own white bloke protagonist syndrome. Does that make sense to you? But you need time in there, in working in activist spaces, to develop those instincts and to get over yourself. So there's nothing you can do, I don't think, about young egg boy Will Connolly. If there was, people were already trying to do it before I mentioned something. Who gives a shit about individuals anyway? He just happens to be an individual with a very large audience. But he's a moron. He's been reading neo-spiritual self-help books for the past few years. He thinks that frequencies can help heal you when you're mad or heal viruses. His brain's a fucking soup. He's a little bush doof wook. Don't worry about that kid, you know? Hopefully he'll grow up on his own time, but you know, there's no need to worry about that one fucking head, you know, or his videos or his page anymore. You know, at least I'd hope that we're all a little bit more aware now that we should stop handing him laurels or garlands or wreaths all the time. I record this for white blokes, white comrades, whatever, inside activist spaces, so that hopefully you can think like how I've been blessed to have the time to do over the years, about how you might have these instinctive tendencies towards being a hero, and how that's part of how you were raised and who you are. But you can do your best work by offsetting that or allaying that by engaging in collectivist stuff. And indeed, you'll find over the years that having real impact as part of a collective is more rewarding, and that's certainly how I've found it to be, than anything you can do on your fucking own. And for the rest of us, we need to stop building up Aussie larrikin legend folk hero figures who allow us to indulge the erroneous idea that we've ended racism forever with one egg. For many reasons, not least of which is the fact that people can coast by on those accolades while simultaneously turning into anything but a leftist folk hero, as we saw with that deluded young man. So I record all these thoughts so that to give you something to reflect on, because I obviously, as you can see, reflect on a lot on this myself. Do always feel free to talk to me about any thoughts that you have as a result of that. And thank you to all of you. Thank you to my Patreons and what have you. Thank you for your support.